Why Ibrahim Traoré's message to Trump resonated worldwide. Maduro Venezuela president. Hello everyone, and welcome back. What happens when a warning isn't shouted, but calmly delivered with the weight of history behind it? What happens when a leader speaks not to attack a country, but to challenge a way of thinking that has shaped global politics for decades? In a recent address that quickly spread beyond diplomatic circles, Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso delivered a message that many interpreted as a direct warning to powerful actors, including the United States, following renewed pressure on leaders like Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro. But Traoré's words were not about one nation, one president, or one confrontation. They were about a mindset that believes power grants permission to interfere, to intimidate, and to decide the fate of entire populations without their consent. Tonight, we're going to unpack what Traoré was really saying, why his message resonated far beyond Africa, and why it signals a deeper shift in how sovereignty is being defended in today's world. Stay with me. This belief has shaped international relations for generations. Powerful nations speak of order, stability, and responsibility, yet often act through pressure, sanctions, and public intimidation. Traoré's argument was simple but uncomfortable. When power is used without restraint, it stops being leadership and becomes domination. And domination, he reminded us, never produces lasting stability. It produces silence. But silence built on fear is temporary. Beneath it, anger grows, distrust grows, resistance grows. History shows this pattern again and again, not in theory, but in the lived experience of millions. Africa knows this story well. For decades, African societies were told what was best for them without being asked. Decisions were made in distant capitals, justified as necessary or moral. Sanctions were imposed in the name of reform. Interventions were launched in the name of peace. Each time, the language sounded noble. Each time, the consequences were borne by ordinary people. Traoré pointed out that law cannot survive when it is applied selectively. Justice cannot exist when it depends on convenience. And peace cannot last when entire populations feel humiliated rather than respected. This is where his warning intersects with events far beyond Africa. When powerful countries publicly target leaders they disagree with, Traoré argued, they are not simply enforcing rules. They are sending a message of fear. The message is clear: if you do not align, this could be you. But that message does not strengthen international order, it corrodes it. Behind every leader stands a population, a history, and a national will. When pressure is applied through sanctions, isolation, or threats, it does not squeeze one individual. It tightens around entire societies, workers who lose jobs, families who face shortages, young people whose futures become uncertain. Traoré spoke calmly, but with precision. He was not provoking, he was reminding. He reminded the world that collective punishment is never neutral. It is political force wearing a moral mask, and when that mask slips, resentment does not disappear, it spreads. This is why he drew attention to places like Venezuela, not to defend any particular government, but to highlight a pattern. Today, one leader is isolated. Tomorrow, another country is pressured. The justifications change, but the method remains the same. Fear may force obedience for a moment, but it never builds legitimacy. And without legitimacy, no global system can survive. This brings us to one of the most important ideas in Traoré's message: multipolarity. He did not describe it as a threat. He described it as a correction to decades of imbalance, where voices from the global south were heard only when they agreed. Today, Africa, Latin America, and Asia are no longer silent observers. They are participants, and participation changes everything. Control no longer guarantees compliance. Pressure no longer guarantees loyalty. When countries feel respected, they cooperate. When they feel humiliated, they resist. This, Traoré emphasized, is not ideology. It is human nature. The era of unquestioned authority is fading, not because nations want conflict, but because they want dignity. Cooperation will still exist. Trade will still exist. Dialogue will still exist. But they will be negotiated, not imposed. Balanced, not dictated. Those who fail to understand this shift, he warned, will mistake silence for agreement and patience for weakness. That mistake has been made before. It never ends well. Traoré also challenged a sensitive contradiction in global politics: selective democracy. Elections are praised when outcomes align with external preferences and questioned when they do not. Sanctions follow some violations, while others are ignored. This double standard destroys credibility faster than any speech can repair. You cannot teach values you do not practice. You cannot demand legitimacy while denying agency. And you cannot expect trust while applying rules unevenly. People around the world are noticing these inconsistencies. They see which governments are punished and which are protected. This awareness is spreading quietly but firmly. And when faith in democratic principles collapses, something dangerous replaces it: cynicism. Cynicism is fertile ground for instability. Traore's warning was that if democracy is to survive globally, it must be defended honestly and consistently, not loudly, not forcefully, but fairly. Otherwise, it loses its moral authority, and no amount of pressure can restore it. At the center of his message was one non-negotiable principle: sovereignty. Sovereignty, he said, is not a bargaining chip. It is not something exchanged for aid, recognition, or relief. A nation either possesses sovereignty or it does not. Dialogue is essential. Compromise is part of diplomacy. But sovereignty itself is not up for negotiation. Once it is treated as flexible, everything else becomes fragile. Africa has learned this lesson through experience. Development without sovereignty becomes dependency. Security without sovereignty becomes occupation. Progress without sovereignty becomes illusion. This does not mean isolation. Traore was clear. Cooperation is necessary. Trade is necessary. Dialogue is necessary, but cooperation must be chosen, not forced. Otherwise, it becomes another form of control. One of the most powerful moments in his message was when he connected Africa's experience with that of Latin America. Though separated by geography, the histories recognize each other instantly. Control dressed as partnership, extraction disguised as cooperation, intervention explained as responsibility. These are not abstract theories, they are lived realities. By comparing notes, societies across regions are gaining something powerful: awareness. And awareness changes behavior. It makes nations less naive, more cautious, and more determined to protect their choices. This shared awareness is reshaping global politics, not through loud confrontation, but through persistent, intelligent resistance to coercion. Traore was careful to say he was not issuing threats. Threats belong to those who fear losing control. What he offered was a reminder: every action creates consequences. Sometimes they are immediate, sometimes they arrive later, but they always arrive. So what Ibrahim Traoré delivered was not an attack, it was an observation that power without restraint breeds resistance, that law without consistency loses meaning, and that cooperation without respect cannot last. Africa is not shouting, Africa is explaining, and explanation, when grounded in history and experience, can be more powerful than protest. The question now is not whether this message will be heard, but whether it will be understood. Because global leadership today is measured not only by strength, but by credibility. And credibility depends on fairness, restraint, and respect. The world is watching closely. Nations are taking notes, and the choices made now will shape whether the future is built on consent or on fear. Thank you for watching.